Hi everyone, welcome back to Radio Night Crime. Before you drift off, let me know in the comments where you're listening from. If you're enjoying the stories, don't forget to like and subscribe. Now let's relax and jump into tonight's case. Story 1. In 2012, the family of one of the richest people in Brazil, businessman Marcos Matsunaga, became the center of attention after Marcos disappeared on the eve of a major billion-dollar deal. The case shocked the whole country, and photos of the inconsolable widow of the millionaire did not leave the front pages of the leading national publications. Initially, as the main version, the police considered the intrigues of competitors who could kidnap and get rid of the businessman in order to disrupt the upcoming deal. However, the revealed truth turned out to be much more cruel and terrible. The story of a cold-blooded murder and a monstrous attempt to cover up the crime formed the basis of several documentaries. Who is Marcos Matsunaga? Entrepreneur Marcos Matsunaga was one of the richest people in Brazil and ran a family business producing various food products. Yoki. The company was founded by Marcos's grandfather, who had once emigrated across the ocean. His name was Yoshizo Kitano, actually from the first letters of the surname and first name of the founder, and the name of the brand was formed. The foundation of the future business empire was laid in the middle of the last century. It is noteworthy that it all started with a small flour milling enterprise, which managed not only to survive, but also thrive during the years of crisis and war, and then transformed into a huge company with a worldwide reputation and the widest range of products. Marcos was born into a wealthy family, and from an early age he knew no denial of anything. He did not have to build and develop his business from scratch, because he inherited everything that his grandfather and father had created, becoming the CEO of the family food company. He had every chance to become the first billionaire in his family, and he strived for this almost all his conscious life, but such grandiose plans were not destined to materialize. Everyone who was personally acquainted with Marcos characterized him as a good and quite talented businessman, who managed not only to save, but also to multiply the family capital, several times increasing profits. But he was not an easy man, capricious, arrogant, with a heavy character and a constant desire to control everyone who was near him. In addition, the businessman was far from handsome in appearance. He suffered from childhood overweight, had problems with vision because of which he wore glasses, and he was also short in stature and somewhat clumsy. All this from an early age created a lot of problems for the boy when communicating with his peers. He had almost no friends and female representatives of the female sex, and it all shunned this strange and peculiar guy. Marcos for a long time all failed to build a long and serious relationship with anyone, because beyond a couple of dates it did not go. Even his own business and multi-million-dollar inheritance did not make him an enviable and desirable bachelor. He repulsed women with his arrogance and egoism, so Marcos often used the services of escorts and representatives of the ancient profession. There is practically no information about the entrepreneur's first wife in open sources. It is only known that he did not marry out of great love or passion, but rather out of desperation and at the insistence of his relatives. Despite this, the marriage lasted several years, although both spouses almost immediately began to regret their decision to start a family. At first, the young wife tried to put up with the complex character of the businessman, hoping that in time they will manage to become a happy couple where both support and understand each other. But the young woman was wrong, and over the years they only increasingly distanced from each other. Also, Marcos constantly cheated on her and did not even try to hide it or somehow justify it, and he looked for mistresses mainly on websites where girls offered intimacy for money. Alice was one of those girls. She was an escort, and her portfolio was available on the relevant platforms. It was there that the businessman noticed a bright, attractive blonde with a beautiful figure and began to regularly invite her on dates, generously paying for them. Alice was 6 years younger than him. She was born and raised in a very poor and dysfunctional family living in one of the most crime-ridden areas of the city. Alice didn't know her own father. Her mother was a heavy drinker, and she was involved with men who shared her addiction. The girl had a hard and joyless childhood. At a very young age, she was repeatedly beaten, harassed, and abused by her mother's roommates. Barely finished school, Alice literally ran away from home and forever left the neighborhood in which she grew up. The girl took nursing courses, after which she got a job at a hospice. However, she soon realized that caring for dying patients is far from the limit of her dreams and abilities. In addition, sensitive and vulnerable young women quickly became attached to people, and the death of each patient perceived as a personal tragedy. A few years later, Alice decided to get a higher education and completely change her occupation. Her choice fell on the law, which she considered a promising occupation, opening in life almost all the doors. She had long been preparing for admission and was able to score the required number of points in the entrance exams. But to pay for her studies from her modest salary as a nurse, she could not. Alice had no one to help her, because she had severed all ties with her relatives after she left home. Then, young, pretty Alice, with a slender figure, decided to earn on her external data and registered on a site specializing in the provision of escort services. There she was helped to create a bright personal page, and soon wealthy men themselves began to show interest in the young blonde beauty. Escorting and providing intimate services brought Alice a good income, allowing her to pay for her studies and fully support herself. But she planned to leave this specific occupation as soon as she got her diploma and got a job in her specialty. During this period, Alice met Marcos, who became one of her regular customers. He was generous with gifts and met regularly with Alice without hiding from anyone. She knew that the businessman was married, but at the time, she couldn't have dreamed that one of the richest men in the country would leave his wife for her. The story of Alice Matsunaga was like a Cinderella tale. A poor girl from a disadvantaged family, engaged in providing escort services, meets a multimillionaire who soon falls madly in love with her. Marcos really literally lost his head, but now it is impossible to say for sure whether Alice herself made efforts to do so. After about 6 months, Marcos realized that he wanted not just to date his new young mistress, but to be with her permanently. He, without a second thought and regret, filed for divorce from his first wife and began to present everyone Alice as his fiancée. For obvious reasons, the businessman did not want anyone to know about how he met his chosen one and what she earned a living. Therefore, the couple came up with a quite ordinary story of a casual acquaintance in a cafe and adhered to this version. Even the closest relatives and few friends of Marcos did not guess anything. However, Alice in the family Matsunaga received not too welcome. The parents of the entrepreneur guessed that this attractive young person put into action all her charm to fall in love with the rich but ugly Marcos, and now she was going to great lengths to pretend that she did not notice his hard character. Nevertheless, when Marcos announced his intention to divorce his first wife and marry Alice, no one strongly objected. The businessman arranged a lavish wedding in the traditional style, with a white dress, a large number of guests, and a huge tiered cake. After that, he moved his wife to his huge and luxurious mansion, where she became a full-fledged mistress. Matsunaga had long been known as an avid collector of expensive wines and rare weapons. For wines in his house was built a huge cellar where the bottles were carefully sorted by year and country, and for weapons the house had a secret room, on the walls of which from floor to ceiling flaunted firearms and edged weapons. Marcos was very proud of his collections and was constantly engaged in their replenishment. However, in addition, his house was literally full of antiques, luxury goods, and modern art, which tastelessly hung on the walls and stood literally on all surfaces. Soon after the wedding, the couple decided that they were ready to have an heir, but despite all their efforts, Alice for a long time did not get pregnant naturally. Then the couple decided to resort to the procedure of in vitro fertilization, but even here success awaited them far from immediately. When their common daughter was born, it seemed that the happiness of the couple now has no limits. The young parents were engaged in the education of the long-awaited baby girl, made plans for the future, and when the girl grew up a little, the whole family began to travel the world, getting acquainted with different cultures and traditions. Their daughter was a real little princess who was brought up in love, care, and luxury, but the couple had one very specific common hobby, hunting large animals, although it would be more correct to say that it was always a hobby of Marcos, who at different times tried to join it to his chosen women and his first wife. But most women did not just dislike this activity, it frankly repulsed them. The businessman no longer hoped that he would meet someone who would share his passion. Now many believe that Alice became interested in hunting to win even more favor Marcos and conquer his heart. At first they visited shooting ranges together, where Alice learned how to handle different types of firearms, and afterward they went into the woods together to hunt wild animals. Alice felt no pity when she took the lives of animals, and treated it as a kind of competition. Either you do it or you don't. Marcos liked this approach, and he liked to watch his wife handle her weapons and stalk her prey. He also taught her how to skin and carve wild boars, deer, and other forest creatures. Together they skinned them in separated body parts, using large knives, special cleavers, and axes. In addition, the family did not have cats or dogs as pets, but poisonous snakes for which special terrariums were built, with conditions as close as possible to their natural habitat. It was the realization of another long-time dream of Marcos, who adored snakes, but his first wife did not approve of the idea of having a home terrarium. Alice had really bought Marcos off by sharing his rather strange hobbies. In the spring of 2012, the entrepreneur was preparing to make perhaps the main deal of his life and career, which would make him a billionaire and take his income to a whole new level. He was actively negotiating with several business partners going to sell the family company and the proceeds of the huge sum of money to invest in a new profitable business. At home at this time, Matsunaji rarely appeared because he was completely absorbed in work and the realization of his grandiose plans. He and his wife moved into an elite apartment complex located in the business center of the city, not far from the main office of the businessman's company. Marcos was away almost all the time, while his young wife was bored alone in a luxurious apartment with a panoramic view of the city. The businessman's work schedule was scheduled literally by the minute. He was lost in meetings, business meetings, and consultations with specialists. Often he did not even spend the night at home, but promised his wife that as soon as the deal was done, their lives would be completely changed and transformed. On May 19, 2012, on the eve of the deal for $1 billion, the entrepreneur disappeared without a trace. His wife reported the incident only the next day, because she believed that Marcos at work. According to Alice, in the evening he was scheduled a meeting which could last into the night, and early in the morning her husband was to meet with a business partner, so he took some things, warned that most likely to spend the night in the office and then go straight to the deal. When the next day Marcos did not return home and stopped answering his phone, Alice became concerned and reported him missing. The police immediately found out that the entrepreneur did not show up for a meeting in the evening or an important meeting in the morning, which he simply could not miss. In this regard, there was immediately a version that the millionaire was kidnapped, and most likely, his family in the coming hours will receive ransom demands. But 24 hours passed, then the second, no ransom demands were received, and hopes that Matsunaga was still alive were literally melting before our eyes. Investigators at this time did not sit idle, and began to question relatives, friends, and business partners of the businessman, trying to find out whether he had enemies and who could be beneficial to his disappearance or the disruption of the upcoming deal. However, despite all efforts, it was not possible to find a specific person or people who might have wished the death of the businessman. He ran his business competently, was able to prioritize and plan his steps ahead, so that his strategic decisions made almost everyone always benefited. A few days later, after taking her little daughter, Alice came to the home of her father-in-law and mother-in-law to tell what she had not dared to tell the police. The young woman with tears in her eyes said that her husband has long been cheating on her with a girl named Natasha Villa Real Lima, and did not hide it. True, after several major quarrels and threats to divorce, Marcos promised that he would leave the mistress for the sake of preserving the family. In fact, the man did not stop meeting with Natasha, but began to do it more carefully, so as not to provoke another family scandals. The wife guessed everything, and decided to hire a private detective to gather evidence of the businessman's infidelity. Alice had photographs and videos of her husband on romantic dates with the same Natasha. It was noteworthy that he took his new girlfriend to the same restaurants and entertainment venues that he and his wife frequented and where everyone knew him. Marcos seemed to demonstrate to others how much he disdained his wife and can openly cheat on her without hiding from anyone. As it later turned out, Natasha Lima businessman found on the same site escort services where he once met Alice. They met for about 5 months, and during that time he gave her an expensive car and also paid a large sum of money for Natasha to remove her profile from the site. The available photos and videos proving her husband's cheating, the daughter-in-law presented to Marcos's parents. She also added that she had shown all this to Marcos the day before his disappearance, but instead of making excuses and asking for forgiveness, he simply packed his things, told his wife that he was leaving her, and then left their apartment and disappeared without a trace. Based on Alice's story, her husband, giving in to passion, simply decided to run away with a new mistress. But everyone who knew Matsunaga unanimously asserted that he could not just leave the business and disappear because he was too serious about the business, which for decades built his family. Answers to many questions were found about a week later, when in a deserted area, 100 kilometers from the house of the businessman, a passerby found scattered garbage bags, inside which were the remains of a human body. The man immediately reported the gruesome discovery to the police, and it soon became clear that the victim was Marcos Matsunaga, who was searched for all over the country. Experts determined that the businessman was killed by a shot to the head, after which his body was dismembered, packed into garbage bags, and taken to the outskirts of the city. It was noteworthy that the murderer, according to the pathologists, was either a surgeon or an experienced butcher who was proficient with a carving knife. Such a conclusion was inevitable, based on how accurately and professionally the cuts were made in the right places to separate the body parts from each other. At the first stage of the investigation did not have any concrete leads, so it was decided to start the investigation from the place where the deceased man was last seen alive. Elite residential complex, where Marcos lived with his wife and daughter, was equipped with numerous video surveillance cameras, the records of which began to be scrutinized. It turned out that the evening before the disappearance, the couple ordered food delivery home. On the recordings of the camera in the elevator was seen as Marcos goes down to the first floor and then comes back with boxes of pizza in his hands. He enters his apartment and never leaves it again. Not that evening, not at night, and not the next day. Matsunaga seems to disappear into his own home, but in the morning his wife leaves the apartment with 3 large-wheeled suitcases. The footage shows that the suitcases are very heavy, and she moves them with great difficulty. The investigators had already guessed what kind of luggage it was. On the same day, the businessman's widow was taken into custody and brought to the police station to testify. At first, she tried to deny everything and stuck to the initial version that her husband had left her for a mistress. But when she was shown the elevator footage, she burst into tears and started talking. According to Alice, their family life has long since broken down, and from the former idol is not left a trace. Her husband humiliated her, constantly reproached her with the work in the escort, saying that he pulled her out of the mud, and also stated that she was a bad mother for their daughter. He also tried to control literally every move his wife made, not allowing her to make friends. When Alice once raised the topic of divorce, Marcos laughed and replied that he would leave her with nothing, take the child, and forbid her to see him. Alice said that on that fateful evening she showed her husband received from the detective pictures, which were captured Marcos with his mistress, but he only made him angry. He slapped his wife, and then, according to her, everything was as if in a fog. Alice does not remember how she got a gun in her hands, from which she shot her husband, and later, realizing what had happened, she decided to dispose of the body, making it look as if he disappeared without a trace. Alice had experience as a nurse and was familiar with human anatomy, and her husband had taught her how to skin and cut up animal carcasses, for which they had the necessary tools at home. All that followed was a matter of technique. While Alice was cutting up and bagging her husband's body, their young daughter was sleeping peacefully in the next room. From the beginning, Alice's testimony raised many doubts and questions. In addition, it soon became clear that the very pictures and videos proving Marcos's cheating, his wife received from the hands of a private detective only on May 20th, that is, after she had killed her husband. Then, as I said, Alice took these photos and videos to the parents of the businessman, saying that Marcos had abandoned her by running away with his mistress. We also managed to find Natasha Lima, who appeared in court as a witness. According to her, Marcos himself wanted a divorce, but frankly afraid of his wife, saying that she was mentally unstable and capable of terrible things. The last time Natasha saw her lover the day before his disappearance, he complained about the constant scandals in the family and said that after the sale of the company is going to move to live in Florida. where he plans to establish a new company. Taking Alice with him was not part of his plans. He was going to divorce her and forget her like a terrible dream. Another terrible discovery was the discovery by experts of blood in the lungs of the dead man, which indicated that Marcos was still alive and trying to breathe when his wife separated his head from the body. This is wild and horrifying. Alice herself vehemently denied this, insisting that he died instantly from a bullet. The pathologist also found that the same bullet entered Marcos's head at a rather odd angle, as if he was sitting or lying down, not expecting to be shot. So he didn't even try to defend himself or dodge. This contradicted Alice's account of her husband attacking her and her trying to defend herself. On top of that, almost all the witnesses who testified at the trial denied that Matsunaji could have hit his wife. Yes, he had a difficult character, could say various hurtful words, but in life never raised a hand on anyone. Everything looked as if Alice herself made up this episode, because Marcos could not refute anything. As a result, the court found Alice guilty of premeditated murder with particular cruelty and attempting to conceal the crime. Alice Matsunaga was sentenced to 20 years in prison, which many considered an extremely lenient punishment for such a crime. The parents of the deceased man are now responsible for the upbringing of their daughter. Story 2. Life in an orphanage is not the best. You don't have your own corner, you don't have your own time, and if you can't fight back, you get beaten up by those who have been here for a long time. Amanda and Anna Marie McClure are a little luckier than the others. When there are two of you, the likelihood of fighting back increases. Besides, these juvenile aggressors only pick on loners. The sisters were comfortable alone, and they did not try to get acquainted with anyone. They hoped that their stay in this hell would not be long. Soon their mother would find out that their father had been imprisoned, which meant that the girls were sent to an orphanage, from which they should be taken away as soon as possible. It is impossible not to find out that their father, Larry McClure, was sent to prison. It was talked about on TV and written in newspapers for a long time. Time passed. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months. It became clear that we could forget about returning home. One day the sisters rescued a newcomer, Meredith, from being bullied. The girl lived with her drug-addicted mother, was very thin, frightened, and flinched at any rustle. She came to the shelter after her mother died of an overdose, and Meredith herself was afraid to call the emergency services. So she lived with her body for a few days. One day a friend came to visit her mother, and upon finding her friend dead, called emergency services from a payphone so as not to be involved in any way. Meredith became a friend to the McClure sisters, the three of them becoming more fun and safer. Amanda and Anne-Marie had never told anyone the reason they were here. Meredith had asked about it once, but Anne-Marie had brushed it off and blurted out something about a policeman father who had tried to apprehend a dangerous criminal, but had been killed on the job. Amanda listened to the story with her eyes wide open, but her sister gave her a look that told her to stay out of it. Enraptured by their father's posthumous deed, Meredith told about the sisters' fate to the other students of the orphanage, and in an instant the sisters turned into real stars. They were respected, they were envied, because most of those who were here had parents who either died from illegal substances or went to prison. Eventually, all the children wanted to be friends with the sisters, and their reclusive life came to an end. Unfortunately, this beautiful life, albeit in an orphanage, quickly came to an end. Unknown from where the information appeared that the father of Anne-Marie and Amanda is not a dead policeman at all, but on the contrary, a living criminal, serving time in prison for violent acts of a sexual nature towards a young girl. Then the fate of the sisters turned into a real hell. However, after a while, they were lucky. Fortunately, two different families decided to adopt the girls almost simultaneously, and they got the opportunity to start a new life. But however, already separately, the connection between them broke and was lost. There are no details about the sisters' life in foster homes. Amanda and Anne-Marie could remain in this story only children of the rapist, but their adult life flowed into the most high-profile case of the state of Virginia. Amanda is known to be married to 38-year-old John McGuire. They met when she was already 29 years old. Her adoptive parents even began to worry that Amanda would be a loner for the rest of her life and the lack of biological family, including the betrayal of her mother, had a negative impact on her psyche. The foster parents breathed a sigh of relief only when Amanda admitted to them that she had a young man with whom they were going to get married. It was the second wedding for John, and he also had 2 sons from his first marriage. Anne-Marie had never been able to build her family. One could be happy for Amanda. She really could have a strong and loving family. John was an incredibly positive guy. What could be said against it if even with his ex-wife they had a warm and friendly relationship? After a while, the sisters' father, Larry McClure, was released on parole. Settling still in the same Virginia, in a mobile home, he made no small effort to find his daughters. The first place he went was to Amanda's foster parents, Gwenom and Alex. Larry went straight to their house, said hello, introduced himself, said he wanted to see his daughter and asked for her contacts, address and phone number. Outwardly, he looked very bad, even frightening, deep wrinkles all over his face, huge bags under his eyes, and besides, as it seemed to them, he was not sober. No, he didn't smell of alcohol, and he didn't stagger from side to side on shaky legs. But in general, his behavior was not adequate. Glenn refused Larry's request, but promised that they would be sure to tell Amanda that her biological father was looking for her. Larry had been really freaked out when he'd heard the phrase biological father, but he'd thanked him and left. Glenn had indeed kept his word. He had told Amanda that her father was free and looking for her. In the back of Amanda's mind there was a demon, who denied everything and advised to send her father to hell, and an angel who advised to give her father, though a criminal, another chance. The angel one, though it was unclear who was better to listen to. First Amanda called her father. He said he was very happy to hear from her. Asked how she was doing. She told him that was doing well, married and feeling happy. Larry was happy for his daughter, and suggested that she come over for a joint dinner with her husband. Amanda didn't realize if she should live to see her father, but it was as if he knew just what to push. Come on. Forget the old grudges. I have lived all these years with only one thought, to see you and Anne-Marie. Anna, unlike you, must have missed me after all. You've already seen her? Amanda wondered. Of course I have. We went on a nature trip with her and had a wonderful time, like a real family, like father and daughter. It was like those years of separation never happened. She also asked a lot about you. If Amanda didn't know how to deal with her father, she wanted to see her sister, who had been separated from her in the orphanage almost 20 years ago, and so she agreed. In the case file, there is no description of their first meeting, but 2 facts are known. Larry lied about Anne-Marie. At that time, she lived in North Carolina, which is 186 miles from Virginia, and Larry had never seen or spoken to her, and so father and daughter met. Their meetings led to Larry getting Amanda and John hooked on illegal substances that he brewed himself in his camper. Larry literally used the daughter and son-in-law. Before meeting the father, the financial situation of the couple was stable, but Larry pulled money from them for the production of illegal substances. And when Amanda and John lost their jobs because of their addiction, Larry persuaded John to register, because drug addicts received help from the state in the amount of $180, which were still not enough to buy substances and ingredients. That's when Anne-Marie appears in the story, and Larry uses her in the same way. He gets her hooked on substances and pulls money out of her. Amanda and John find themselves at an impasse. They have no jobs. Because of huge debts, they lose their house, and the only way to stay afloat is to move into Larry's camper. John's folks at this point still had no idea. He called his parents. His mother was seriously ill at the time. John informed them that he and Amanda were going on a trip together. That was the last time John's parents heard their son alive. In fact, no trip was planned. Amanda and John moved in with Larry, where they engaged in a small circle of illicit substance use and alcohol consumption. The whole tragedy occurred on Valentine's Day. John, who rarely recovered from the effects of illegal substances, was still madly in love with Amanda and decided to prepare a surprise for her, a festive evening in the family circle. He bought meat and alcohol, cooked a fancy dinner, at which in addition to his wife, of course, were Larry and Anne-Marie. Under the prolonged influence of the drugs, a terrible madness occurred in the family. Amanda and Larry became much closer than father and daughter. Unfortunately, John couldn't see it coming. Yes, you all thought right. father and daughter considered themselves a couple. Therefore, John was now redundant. During the meal, John spoke very many warm words to Amanda, and Larry was insanely nervous about it, and the tension grew. Eventually, Larry interrupted his son-in-law's speech and asked him if he could be completely honest with his wife. The man replied in agreement. Then Larry proposed a game. John's legs were tied, and he was asked to answer honestly all the questions that related to his past life. Yes, at first, the questions were really harmless. Childhood, school, university, and all that. But at some point, Larry, under the influence of drugs, began to accuse John that he was an undercover FBI agent. And when John denied it, they started beating him up. It ended when John, begging for mercy and covering himself with his children, tried to untie his legs and had a bottle of wine smashed over his head. Yes, it was the same wine he'd bought for the family dinner. Larry, Amanda, and Amory tortured John for 2 days and used illegal substances in parallel. Finally, when they had had enough, Amanda pulled a black bag over her husband's head and squeezed it around his neck until he stopped breathing. John was buried in the backyard, after which the crazy family celebrated the engagement of Larry and Amanda, father and daughter, and naturally it had to be celebrated with a new batch of psychotropic substances and alcohol. On the 3rd day, their psyche went haywire. They began to see John's ghost, police sirens, and the ground in which they buried John seemed to them unearthed, as if John was able to get out of there, escape, and report everything to the police. It sounds wild and crazy, but the crazy father and daughters decided to back up. They dug up John's body, checked his pulse, and even his pupil's reaction to flashlight light, even though the body, for all its biological signs, was already in the decomposition stage, but that didn't seem enough to them. To prevent John from coming back to life and escaping, they cut his body into pieces with a wood axe and drove an aspen stake into each piece of his body. The remains were reburied in different places and covered with lime to speed up the decomposition process. 3 weeks later, Larry and Amanda were married. Larry changed his name so that no one would know they were related. The new family decided to start a new life. To do this, they moved to Kentucky and agreed to stop using illegal substances once and for all. In the rented house, to hide all suspicion from themselves, they even hung a U.S. flag over the door to the house, just like their neighbors did. By this time, John's ex-wife and parents began to worry that he wasn't making contact, and in 2019, John's mother even filed a police report about his disappearance. As for Larry, he failed to notify the police that he had moved from one state to another, and that was against the terms of his probation, which is why he went back behind bars. In prison, Larry's psyche finally failed. It's hard to expect anything good when you've been using illegal substances for a long time, mixing them with alcohol, and then, at the snap of your fingers, you find yourself in a place where you can't get them. Withdrawal syndrome works, increased nervousness, lack of boundaries between reality and fantasy. It's pretty clear if you marry your own daughter. Larry was pretty sure that the parole violation was just an excuse to dig up the backyard and find the remains of John's body. He urgently needed to contact Amanda or Anna Marie and tell them to have his daughters dig up the body parts and rebury them somewhere far from home. All prisoner calls are always tapped, so the information had to be conveyed in a veiled manner. Larry even prepared a speech and thought of everything in detail, but the problem was that he was denied calls. Finally, he couldn't stand it any longer, called the policeman on duty, and told him he had something to confess. Larry's logic was that if he confessed to the murder before he was charged, he could avoid at least the death penalty, and if he blamed it on his daughters, yeah, that would be even better. The cop didn't even believe Larry at first. What murder? What body parts buried in the backyard? What was this lunatic's idea? Why would this junkie dig his own grave? But by law, the man's word had to be verified. At first, the Czech wanted to organize only formally. Yes, there was a statement, yes, the place was checked. No, nothing was found. But then it turned out that John is really considered missing, and just in case, to the place of Larry's residence, sent a police detachment. First on the ground, they found traces of the lime that Larry had mentioned, and then absolutely all the words of the criminal were confirmed. The McClure sisters were apprehended immediately. Amanda and Anna Marie were in shock, and simply could not believe that their father, and for someone else and husband, could confess to such a brutal murder. They were even more shocked when they learned that Larry tried to make himself an innocent sheep, and in his testimony indicated that it was his daughters killed John, and he was only an unwitting participant in the crime. Then each of the family began to save their own skin, and to convince the police that it was just him in this terrible story was an accident. It was especially hard for John's relatives in this situation. Since his body, in fact, there was no body, and there were only remains, these remains had to be taken from the criminalists, transported to his parents and buried in a closed coffin. It has been mentioned many times that John was a very nice guy. So despite all the difficulties, his parents were able to bury him. Some of his friends helped with money, some with transportation, some with funeral arrangements. John was buried in a Lutheran church on October 25, 2019. On February 15th, the day after Valentine's Day, someone in the McClure family posted a Facebook post on John's behalf that he was leaving on a trip where he would not be able to be in touch for a long time, and asked his friends not to worry about his long absence. This indicated that the crazy family knew that they were going to kill the poor guy soon, so they misled everyone so that the family wouldn't start sounding the alarm. Despite such a brutal crime, for the duration of the trial, Larry and Amanda had 6 months added to their sentence for the marriage of a daughter and father. As such, marriages are criminalized in the state. The trial began. Larry was given the floor. I have felt remorse for my own children for most of my life. Yes, when they were very young, I committed a serious crime that put them in an orphanage. Their birth mother abandoned them, and I was the only one who had a heartache for my little ones. I am extremely grateful to the people who adopted my babies. I will not hide. I even attended churches and prayed for their adoptive parents when I got out. I crazily wanted to make up for all the years I had missed. That's probably why I acted the way I did. I mean, I could have walked away from the crime if I'd convinced Amanda not to do it. But I confess I didn't. Mr. Judge and jury will probably not understand me, and I share their point of view. But the thing is, they weren't in my shoes. John was a fine young man. I feel sorry for him. If I could, I would turn things around. But no one can raise the dead. And I couldn't say no to Amanda, my favorite and youngest daughter. But she didn't care about John. All she wanted was to be able to withdraw government money from John's account. Have you ever been willing to kill a man for $180? No? Then if you don't understand me as a father, you should understand what kind of person she is. She's a monster, not a person. Me, Amanda, and Marie, we are overly addicted to illegal drugs, so we deserve to be punished. I want to address the jury. No matter what sentence you choose for me, I'm sober about my health and say that I can't live more than 10 years. I'm very sorry for this situation, and I apologize to all of John's loved ones. Again, he was a great guy. The trial went on for a very long time as the defendants flip-flopped back and forth on the decision to kill John. Amanda, who could not tolerate such a long trial, even made a deal with the investigators where she was promised to be charged with involuntary manslaughter. At the next trial, Larry gave a very different speech. When it all started, the 4 of us bought the ingredients to make illegal substances and went back to my trailer where I started making them. Amanda came up to me and said she wanted to get back at John. The fact is that John, under the influence of the drugs, raped Anna Marie and she got pregnant. And as for me, I had to earn the trust of my daughters after all these years apart. I couldn't refuse, you know? I blame myself for that. I think every day that I should hang myself. But why should it be me if this crime is their fault? After Larry's speech, John's family got the floor. His mother sobbed non-stop, so much so that she couldn't say a word. Even if I can never forgive the McClure family, I will never be able to forget what happened. Also, know that I wish I could live to see the day when one of them dies before me. Then John's children were given the floor, who literally cursed the killers and said they would never forgive them. The judge handed down the final verdict, which sentenced Larry McClure to life in prison without parole. When the punishment for Amanda was announced, her adoptive parents were very sorry that they did confess to their daughter that she was wanted by her father. They had brought her up with freedom of choice all her life, but they did not know that this freedom could have such an impact on her future fate. Amanda, in turn, during the announcement of the verdict, said that all this is the fault of her father, who could not survive the feeling of jealousy. Amanda's poor parents asked the judge to consider that if it were not for the negative influence of her father, their adopted daughter would never have gone to such a brutal crime. However, prosecutors viewed the murder as a conspiracy so that Amanda and Larry could be together as a couple. The first hearing was dedicated to Amanda, and she was sentenced to 40 years, but the judge noted that she would probably be behind bars for only 20 years. When the sentence was read to Anne-Marie, she tried her best to prove that she was against John's murder, but she was forced to go to the end by her father and sister. And she was a witness at the wedding of Larry and Amanda, only because she was afraid for her future life. In the end, Anne-Marie was sentenced to 40 years in prison. Story 3. On the morning of August 22, 2016, residents of the small Spanish town of Pobra do Caraminal, rushing to work, found flyers posted everywhere. Volunteers had tirelessly pasted them on every building. The pictures on the flyers showed a young 18-year-old Diana Maria Kerr Lopez Pinal. The young girl was of a very frail build at about 6 feet tall. Her black hair, brown eyes, and delicate appearance made her irresistible. The evening before she disappeared, she was wearing pink shorts, a t-shirt, a white sweatshirt, and black sneakers. The description said the girl left home the night before and suddenly disappeared. Since last night, her family, along with volunteers and special services, have been desperately and tirelessly searching for the missing girl in every possible way. They have scoured every street and explored every corner, hoping to find some trace and bring Diana home. Juan Carlos, Diana's father, was in Madrid, but wasted no time in contacting the police to trace the calls from his daughter's phone and find out the last location of her phone. He also contacted the local newspaper and urged residents to help with the search. If you have any information, even the smallest, contact the police. The police need your help, Diana's father reported. Diana's mother, on the verge of depression, pleaded with the public. We are doing everything we can to find Diana, but we still haven't gotten any answers. If you have any information, please help us. We are in a situation where even the slightest rumor can become important and help us find our daughter. Diana Maria Kerr Lopez Pinal was born on August 12, 1998, in Madrid. She was the daughter of Diana Cristina Lopez Pinal Pinarejo and Juan Carlos Kerr, and had a sister named Valeria. The family was quite wealthy and closely related. However, in 2013, Diana's parents divorced, which greatly affected the sisters. They faced depression, often conflicted over the attention of their mother, who took most of the care of them. Despite this, the father saw his daughters regularly. During vacations, Diana and her mother and sister often visited the small town of Pobra do Caraminal on the coast, with a population of about 10,000. In the summer of 2016, Diana's family spent their vacations as usual in the cozy town of Pobra do Caraminal. Every summer, they returned here to enjoy the silence and beauty of the place. Sunday, August 21st, promised to be just like all the other days. In the evening, around 10 o'clock, Diana went up to her mother and told her that she was going to go to Valle England Park to meet her friends and have fun in honor of the Feast of the Virgin Carmen. Valle England Park was not far from the cottage where the family was staying, and was a place where Diana often walked. Her mother, seeing nothing strange in it, allowed her to go there again. The girl spent that evening merrily among her friends. For hours later, Diana said goodbye to her friends and was about to return home, not realizing that this would be their last goodbye. On the way, she met her acquaintance, Paseo de Ariel, not far from the very pizzeria where Diana often spent time. It was about 2:30 in the morning when they said goodbye. Paseo de Ariel was the last person to see Diana on that dark night. The morning of August 22, 2016, turned into a nightmare for Diana's mother, Maria Kerr Lopez Pinal. At 8:30 in the morning, she realized that something was wrong with her daughter. The girl hadn't come home from a party. Her cell phone was off or out of range, and this caused alarm. The mother decided not to wait and immediately called the police, reporting her daughter missing. Based on the information from the mother, it could be concluded that Diana did not have any serious emotional or mental health issues. despite a troubled childhood due to her parents' divorce. Her prolonged absence was very strange and raised serious concerns. Police began to unravel the tangle of incomprehensible events surrounding the disappearance of Diana Maria Kerr Lopez Pinal, and investigators had to find out what happened when Diana disappeared without a trace. It turned out that Diana's last messages were sent to a friend of hers from Madrid via WhatsApp. In them, she wrote about a certain stranger who was stalking her and shouting strange phrases, scaring the girl. These messages were Diana's last contact with the outside world, as she no longer responded to the messages, although they were read. The next day, the police began to retrace the route Diana had to take to get home. It was there, along the road, that they found a black hairband that looked very much like the one Diana had been wearing that night. It was the only thing that was found at the scene of the disappearance. But other than that, investigators had no other evidence. Diana's friends were unable to provide any useful information, and there were no CCTV cameras on the last stretch of Diana's journey. The street was poorly lit and sparsely populated, with only a few garages and a dilapidated Boomerang nightclub along the road. Some witnesses claimed to have seen Diana get out of a car with 3 guys in it. Allegedly, she moved to another car, which took her away from the port. But these testimonies were not confirmed. Investigators considered 2 main versions of what happened. The first one suggested that Diana was kidnapped by someone she might have known. The second version linked the disappearance to a possible attack by a maniac. Diana's mother even suggested a third version, that her daughter could have been taken away on a boat. Diana's friend and ex-boyfriend reported that she met a guy from Morocco, and together, they bought hashish. But this information only complicated the picture of the disappearance. An important point was the information in the media about the discovery of the clothes that Diana wore that evening. However, Diana's mother denied this information, claiming that no clothes were found. In addition, her credit card and identification were left in the house. Diana could not just run away, leaving all her belongings and documents behind. This fact and other circumstances confirmed that the girl's disappearance was not of her own free will. Nevertheless, the case still remained mysterious and could not be solved. Shortly after Diana's disappearance, the press reported on the quarrel that broke out between Diana and her mother, just a few days before the tragic event. The media claimed that Diana had suffered a nervous breakdown that required medical attention, and that her younger sister, Valeria, had also been hospitalized with the same symptoms. To prevent further litigation and conflict, custody rights to the younger sister were transferred to the father on Thursday, September 1st. This was a preventative measure to avert further strife in the local community, which was already gripped by an unsettling atmosphere over Diana's disappearance. The father and his daughter left town, and rumors began to spread that the family was hiding something important. According to Diana's friends, running away from home was commonplace for the sisters, especially for her younger sister, Valeria, who was only 16 years old. Relationships in the family were complicated, and quarrels between mother and daughters were not uncommon. This information became available to the public, and the question immediately arose, why was the mother so anxious when Diana did not return home, if the girl had previously often left home? On Wednesday, August 31st, Diana's parents did not show up for a scheduled press interview where they were scheduled to give details of the investigation. The family lawyer explained that the parents were emotionally crushed at the thought that they might never see their daughter again. The newspaper El Mundo published an article on September 11th that shed light on other aspects of the family's life. It said that the mother's words that Diana did not have mental problems were contradicted by information about her April disappearance. At the time, Diana left home for 3 days and her mother did not contact police. The girl would turn off her phone to anger her mother and said she no longer wanted to live with her. Letters written by Diana and Valeria to each other also appeared in the press. From them, it became clear that both sisters were going through serious emotional problems. Valeria has even been hospitalized several times over the past year, once having to have her stomach pumped due to an overdose of prescription drugs. In the absence of progress in the investigation into Diana's disappearance, prosecutors have launched an investigation into the abuse of the Lopez Pinal family's youngest daughter, Valeria. The investigation into Diana Kerr's disappearance continued to be intense and progressed at full speed. Forensic experts seized a number of items belonging to the girl, including a toothbrush, a comb, a personal computer, her diary, and some prescription drugs. These items were subjected to a thorough analysis. Investigators then began questioning Diana's acquaintances, including a young Moroccan man with whom Diana had a brief affair. All of these measures failed to yield the desired results, and further police searches remained unsuccessful. The police conducted extensive searches in the mountains, forests, rivers, and lakes near the site of the disappearance. However, it appears that Diana disappeared around 3 a.m., and the last signal from her phone was found in the Tarragona area, 13 miles from where the family was staying. 72 days after her disappearance, Diana Kerr's case remained a mystery. None of the investigators' leads have yet been confirmed. In addition to a hairband, police found a cell phone that matched the description of Diana's phone. Her father confirmed that it was his daughter's cell phone. 2 months after her disappearance, Diana's Facebook profile was suddenly activated. Friends and relatives immediately notified the police and provided screenshots. It turned out that the Remind Password function had been used to avoid entering profile login details. This left 2 theories. Either Diana had forgotten her password, or the attacker was trying to gain access to her profile. Diana's phone was a key element in the case. However, it was never able to shed any light on the mysterious disappearance. On November 10, 2016, the driver of the very car in which Diana was allegedly last seen was finally identified. The man had previously been detained on charges of human trafficking. Information about his involvement in Diana's disappearance was kept secret for a long time so as not to disrupt the investigation. His wife claimed that he was with her that night, which excluded him from the list of suspects. However, on December 25, 2017, an incident occurred that became a key point in the investigation. One of the girls was attacked by a man, demanding her phone and threatening her with a weapon. The terrified victim screamed and a couple passing by came to her aid. They rescued the girl from the thug who tried to pull her into a car. The shaken victim immediately contacted police, providing a description of the perpetrator and his license plate number. The next morning, police arrested 41-year-old Jose Enrique Abing, who was also known as El Chico. The man already had a criminal past. The police immediately found out Jose Enrique turned out to be the same driver detained in 2016 on suspicion of kidnapping Diana Kerr. However, he was then released because they believed the alibi provided by his wife. The police again questioned the suspect and his wife. As a result of the interrogation, the wife admitted that she had previously lied and, in fact, on the night of Diana's disappearance, her husband was out of the house and did not return until 4 a.m. Jose Enrique was eventually forced to admit that he accidentally hit Diana on the road and then was afraid to go to the police. That is why he decided to dispose of the body. However, he later changed his version of events, confessing to kidnapping and killing Diana. According to him, he came to the seashore to pick up gasoline from abandoned cars, and it was there that he saw Diana. Jose kidnapped her, tried to force her to have sexual intercourse, and then strangled her. This shocking truth brought new details to the case and confirmed that Diana Kerr's disappearance was the result of a gruesome crime. The disappearance of Diana Kerr Lopez Pinal was a long and harrowing experience for her family and everyone who followed the case. Nearly 500 days of investigation and constant media speculation only added to the pain of her loved ones. The accusations directed at Diana's parents only served to confuse and hinder the investigation. Despite this, through persistent investigation and the testimony of a second victim, investigators were able to gather the necessary evidence and find the perpetrator. Diana will be remembered by her loved ones as a bright and vivacious young woman who was unlucky enough to find herself in the path of a violent criminal. Her story serves as a reminder of how important it is to unite in the difficult moments of fighting crime to end impunity and ensure the safety of all citizens. Unfortunately, the perpetrator did not admit for a long time where he hid Diana's body, but later, family and friends managed to say goodbye to Diana and give her a proper burial. The body was found in the well of an abandoned warehouse. In January 2018, Jose was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after serving 35 years. Story 4. It's pretty exciting to admit to your parents the decision to play your own wedding. Tina Thomas was a lot more nervous than her fiancé Gabe Watson. Tina was 26 years old at the time, just like her future husband, and this was her third serious relationship and second attempt at a wedding. Her first attempt to build a family with boyfriend Scott McCulloch ended in failure. No, the relationship between young people were just fine, but only Tina's mother was against this wedding, and Scott himself she did not like. There were no specific claims, but like every mother, she wanted a better and happier life for her daughter, and Tina herself, at that moment, was still very young. For this reason, the couple soon parted. The mirage of a joint future melted away. The second attempt, with Stan Marks, also failed. Here Tina's parents did not play any role. The couple could not overcome the first 3-year crisis, and they parted by mutual consent. Finally, on Christmas Eve at a party of friends, Tina meets Gabe Watson. We can't say it was love at first sight, on the contrary. The relationship was built more as mutual support for each other after a recent breakup. Yes, perhaps this is not the most joyful reason to start building a new relationship, but 2 years later Gabe proposed marriage to Tina. Tina, having learned from bitter experience, said she agreed, but couldn't do it without parental blessing. In 2003, Gabe decided like a real prince, beautifully and romantically appealed to the parents of his chosen one and chose Valentine's Day. But Tina's father was away, so the dinner was moved to the next day. On February 15th, during the dinner, when Watson voiced his decision to live with Tina all his life hand in hand, the father of the bride asked a seemingly simple question to the groom. Does he love Tina? Gabe stammered like a schoolboy, but never answered. His father considered this reaction to be a common embarrassment among strangers. Then he asked his daughter the same question. Surprisingly, Tina did not answer this question directly either, but began her speech by saying that she was afraid of being alone at the age of 26. The father thought for a while and blessed the young ones. Preparing for a wedding takes a lot of time and effort, and while Tina was thinking about her outfit, her guests, and the whole wedding, Gabe was only planning the honeymoon. He didn't care at all how his future wife wanted to spend her vacation. He had already decided everything for her. His plan was to go to the Great Barrier Reef, which is located in the Pacific Ocean near Australia, and go diving there. First of all, to look at the sunken ship, the Townsville Titanic, which sank back in 1911. The problem was that Tina, unlike Gabe, wasn't into diving. Yes, he took her scuba diving in the pool sometimes, in calm water under the supervision of lifeguards, but no more than that. Gabe himself was an experienced scuba diver. He was completing a rescue diving course and had over 50 dives to his credit at the time, and of course it wasn't in a pool. If you don't learn to dive by our honeymoon, I'm warning you right away. You're staying home, walking the dog, or pruning roses in the garden. You're not going anywhere with me, said Gabe. Tina had no choice. In fact, Gabe even took out a loan to buy her own equipment and pay for her fiancé's classes. The first instructor Tina had taken lessons with was disappointed in her skills, and even warned Gabe that his fiancée had absolutely no skills for open ocean swimming. A furious Gabe wouldn't listen to the diving instructor, accusing him of being the one who couldn't explain and refused to continue the class. The second instructor rather quickly gave Tina a credit, although then, and noted that Tina does everything from under the stick, solely to please her future husband. On October 11th, the young couple finally got married, and after 2 days, Tina and Gabe flew to Australia, spending on a trip of $10,000 which gave them for the wedding. It should be noted that Gabe devoted part of the honeymoon to Tina. They walked around Sydney, visited the Sydney Aquarium and the zoo. Tina was excited, but the closer they got to going to the Great Barrier Reef, the sadder she became. On the morning of October 21st, they flew to Townsville, and in the evening boarded a boat to one of the most beautiful places on Earth, and every diver's dream. After a while, employees of the diving company will tell that, in fact, the couple did not look like experienced divers, and even Gabe, who had graduated from courses and had experience behind him, could hardly understand the equipment, as if he saw it for the first time in his life. But nevertheless, it was he who helped Tina to pass the exam before diving, although such a test should be conducted separately. And when the instructor offered Tina his help underwater, she refused. It was also noted in the dive log that there was a strong current that day, and this moment in history should not be missed or glossed over. Gabe, as I said, helped his wife sort out the equipment they had bought back in the US and went to get the tanks they had to rent. Gabe took an 11-liter tank for himself and gave his wife an 8.5-liter tank, which for this place was an extremely small volume or even dangerous, given Tina's experience or rather lack thereof. It was not possible to descend to the Townsville Titanic from the first time Tina asked for additional cargo because she could not dive to depth, and Gabe at first did not work underwater computer, which calculates the necessary speed of diving and ascent, as well as shows the amount of oxygen in the cylinders. After returning to the boat, the computer worked, and they tried again. The wreck was 49 feet deep, and Tina was the first to submerge, Gabe swimming behind her. From Gabe's statement, at first everything was fine. At some point Tina stopped, started waving at me, and later signaled that she wanted to go up. I realized right away that she was just panicking. She used to do that. By this time we were halfway up, so I decided to calm her down and stay with her at the same depth for a while without further diving so that she could psychologically get used to the pressure. She continued to breathe very deeply, which was unsafe, and that's when I noticed she was sinking. I tried to grab her belt to hold her down, but she swung her arms so hard that she knocked the mask off my face. While I was putting the mask back on my face, though it didn't take long, Tina was already too far away from me. For a while I tried to swim to her, but I was unsuccessful. Then I decided to return to the surface to ask for help from the lifeguards. On the way, I met another swimmer with a narrow-set eye, but he paid no attention to my signs for help. Yes, there were 2 Asian men with them at depth, but neither of them confirmed Gabe's words about his request for help. Later, when the police took underwater computer readings, they confirmed that Gabe did try to swim after his drowning wife for a while, but eventually gave up the attempt very quickly. Although the ascent to the surface itself was not an emergency, on the contrary, Gabe surfaced as instructed, stopping at each required depth level. As for the other divers, each of them, when questioned by police, claimed that Gabe could have saved his wife, but he simply did not. In addition, this tragic incident occurred at the very beginning of their dive, and therefore Gabe had enough oxygen in his tanks to swim to the bottom and return back to the surface. The rescuers on duty on the ship, as soon as they realized what had happened, immediately went in search of Tina and found her very quickly. But unfortunately, it was too late. Tina was lying on her back, with her eyes open under her mask, at a depth of 82 feet. Her body was immediately lifted up, and on the deck of the yacht they gave her artificial respiration for about 40 minutes. But to no avail, Tina died. Gabe all this time did not come close to his wife, but only stood somewhere aside, and according to witnesses, naively sniffed his nose. The same employees of the company said that the young man on the way to the shore and smiled and even played cards with other passengers. Gabe denied this in court. The subsequent autopsy of Tina showed that not everything was so clear. Yes, there are no signs of obvious violent death, but there are bruises on the neck. There are traces of blood in the nostrils, which is also common at the 82-foot depth where Tina's body was found. There are no traces of alcohol in the blood, but there are high levels of drugs, such as ibuprofen and paracetamol, although these drugs are used in the treatment of seasickness. A small amount of fluid was seen in the lungs. The report stated that Tina died from drowning, but it is possible that she drowned while already deprived of oxygen. Tina's gear was checked by the Australian Water Police, but no malfunctions were noted. The police could have written it off as an accident. An inexperienced diver ignored safety rules and paid for it with his life, a very common case unfortunately, but only there were suspicious moments in this story, such as rather ambiguous results of the autopsy. Also, according to the diving team, strange behavior of Watson, which does not fit into the conventional picture, where the husband grieves for his wife who just died. All these factors did not give so easily close the case, and that's why the investigation was taking quite a long time. Gabe realized the detectives were digging for him. In addition, Tina's parents did not want to accept what had happened as a tragic accident and wanted to see their son-in-law in the dock, if not as the murderer of their daughter, then at least as a man who had not helped her. During the first interrogation, the police noted that the suspect was in shock, crying and laughing, twitching nervously, asking to call his father, who complained of pain in his ears, and begging him to tell his wife's parents about the tragedy. Late at night, Gabe was released. He went to the yacht that belonged to the company that sent them to the reef and asked them for a night's lodging, arguing that the trip was supposed to last 2 days. But because his wife had died, they had only been there for 24 hours. He also asked for a refund of half of the cost of their dive. In fact, he never got to see the sunken ship. On October 24th, Gabe's mother flies to Townsville to support her son and help him find a lawyer. That same day, at Gabe's request, they go to the morgue. Gabe wanted to see his wife one more time. Because the husband was still considered a suspect, the morgue employee called the detective who was in charge of the case. In theory, Gabe could have hidden some evidence, but the grief-stricken husband only cried, held his wife's cold hand, and begged her forgiveness, not realizing at all that the police officer was standing outside the door at the time, recording him on a tape recorder. "I didn't mean to hurt you." These are the words Detective Lawrence later uses against Gabe in court. Then at the morgue, "You told Tina you didn't mean to hurt her. What did you mean by that?" Lawrence will ask his question. The story of Gabe's sore ear was repeated again as he was traveling home with his wife's body. During a layover in Oakland, he sought medical attention on the airport grounds and was held there for evaluation. According to the investigation, this was done on purpose to avoid seeing Tina's father. However, and divers will confirm this, ear problems are a fairly common ailment among divers. Tina's funeral was held on November 5th, where Gabe still had to meet with the deceased's father. Gabe, almost in full view of everyone, took off his wife's wedding ring, putting it on his ring finger over hers, as well as earrings, which he immediately handed over to his father-in-law. Watson and the Thomas family never crossed paths again that day. Later in the trial, Gabe would be asked the question, "Did you really take your wife's jewelry off during the funeral?" Gabe will only smile and shrug. "I don't think I could have done it later." Everyone had different opinions about Gabe. Some said that this chubby funny man was quite a kind man, and some on the contrary called him a tyrant and a despot. But they all agreed on one thing. Gabe and Tina were not happy, or at least they didn't seem to be. Tina's friends confirmed what she told her father at a family dinner on February 15th. Her union with Gabe was just a way to avoid dying alone, and that fear had led Tina to die on the seabed. Also, the victim, who died shortly before their honeymoon, confessed to a friend that her husband dragged her by the hand to an insurance company, where he forced her to insure his life at a higher interest rate in case of death, and put his name in the column beneficiary. This testimony was checked through the insurance agent, and he confirmed everything. The cab driver who drove the newlyweds to the yacht was also questioned. Tina cried the whole way, but her husband paid no attention to her. Finally, Tina's friend Amanda Phillips told another story, and it became clear what the couple's relationship was really like. This damn jerk videotaped Tina urinating in the bathroom and then edited it and put it in a tape of them celebrating Christmas. That would have been okay, but he turned it on at a general viewing with a full house of guests. He laughed like a horse while everyone twiddled their fingers around their temples and tried to explain to him that it was a very low act. "I was clutching crosses on my fingers so Tina wouldn't get the idea to marry him." While removing jewelry right during a funeral may seem like a frightening and denunciatory act on Gabe's part, during the trial in 2008, the jury was shown an extremely disturbing footage of Watson visiting Tina's grave, taking all the flowers from it and carrying them away. They were later found in a nearby trash can. Tina's father noticed the missing flowers, and to find out the thief, he set up a hidden camera in the next row among the monuments. But he never expected to see Gabe on the tape and was outraged by such an act. In court, Gabe's defense was that he and his wife had discussed the death of one of their own on an extreme honeymoon, and the lack of flowers on the grave was her request, which sounded very strange and unlikely. There's no telling how long the search for evidence would have dragged on if the cops had put on the exact same gear the newlyweds had and hadn't tried to stage that incident. Gabe said Tina drowned while he was trying to put a mask on her face. It turned out it was impossible to put the mask on underwater by yourself unless you used another source of air, in this case, Tina's oxygen. In late November 2008, the Australian police arrested Gabe, and on June 5, 2009, Gabe's trial began, where he pleaded guilty, but only to failing to save his wife, so he was charged with negligent homicide and sent to prison for 18 months. After completing his sentence, Gabe returned home to the U.S., But a year later, the now U.S. court charged him with first-degree murder, the motive for which was to receive insurance payments after the death of his wife. Gabe's lawyer tried to defend his client, shifting all the blame on the diving company, that the employees of this company did not take care of the safety of tourists, and now, afraid of losing their license and therefore the whole business, are trying to shift the blame on the unhappy husband who has already served his time in another country. As for the money received from the insurance company, the payout amounted to $33,000, while Gabe spent much more money on lawyers and additional expertise. Nevertheless, the prosecution continued to insist that this spending was only because the husband could not assume that he would not be believed, and also the prosecutor refused to accept the fact that Gabe, with a degree in drowning rescue in hand, could not even save his wife. When Gabe had his say, he addressed the jury. It's been 7 years since the tragedy, and there hasn't been a day that I haven't thought about that terrible day. The public has pounced on me, blaming me for my wife's death, calling me a murderer. There wasn't a single person who looked me in the eye and said, "Yes, I understand how bad you feel, but it's not your fault." On the contrary, everyone just wants me dead. And here I can only understand my late wife's parents. Yes, they will never forgive me, no matter how much I kneel before them, and no matter how much I beg their forgiveness. You often hear the phrase, "I can't imagine what it's like to lose a child," but I've never heard anyone say, "I can't imagine what it's like to lose a wife, especially on a honeymoon." If I can be accused of anything, it's that I didn't make enough effort to save Tina, but I've already received my punishment for that. Perhaps you all would have been satisfied if I had drowned with my wife then, 7 years ago, but I was afraid to die, afraid I wouldn't be able to rise from the bottom to the top. I just wanted to live as I still want to live now. No evidence of Gabe's guilt was presented to the court. The jury found Gabe not guilty. What do you guys think? Is Gabe guilty of Tina's death? Story 5. On November 6, 2014, Mexico City police officers found human remains. A part of the torso was found in a vacant lot near the exit from the city. A few days later, bags with arms and legs were found in different parts of the capital. The horrifying fact was the absence of fingers on the limbs. The police sounded the alarm. Apparently, a particularly violent criminal was at work in the region. Squads of officers were assembled and combed the streets. The main goal was to find the head and limbs of the unfortunate man and prevent further crimes. At that moment, everyone was sure that this case was the work of a brutal serial killer. The fingers and head were never found. However, thanks to the professional work of forensic experts, it was determined that the remains belonged to the same person. But due to the absence of fingers and teeth, it was impossible to find out who this person was. The story unfolds in North America. The main character, a resident of Mexico City, Alejandra La Fuente, a searing brunette with gorgeous hair and bright brown eyes, which further emphasized the thick black as tar lashes. She had an athletic, trim figure, which she tried to maintain by practicing fitness, yoga, and breathing exercises. Alejandra loved to take care of herself. She could often be found at a beauty salon, massage, or spa. In warm weather, she lounged on the beach doing scientific work. And on cloudy days, she could visit tanning salons. In general, we can say that the young woman loved herself very much and considered herself the standard of female attractiveness. Alejandra did not lag behind in terms of career. Her father is a doctor of sciences, a famous psychiatrist, Alberto de Fuente. He is a luminary of science, deals with such deviations of the psyche, such as schizophrenia and manic disorders. And he is famous not only for his scientific work, but also for his experiments on patients. For Alejandra, her father was an idol. Wanting to achieve the same success, she followed in his footsteps. To do so, she enrolled in the best university for psychiatry and graduated with honors. Her perseverance, resourcefulness, extraordinary intelligence, as well as her father's connections, helped her to write and defend her thesis on manic syndrome. However, in the future psychiatry, Alejandra did not become engaged in psychiatry. She was attracted by the work of a psychotherapist. Thanks to her father's money, the young woman got a license and opened her office in a new business center in the heart of the capital. There was no shortage of clients, but she only saw women. Women with eating disorders, depression, relationship problems, and low self-esteem came for counseling. Alejandra helped to solve family problems. But as it often happens, her personal life left much to be desired. The young woman's first marriage broke up. But in the end, the couple had 2 children. 2 charming girls with Alejandra's eyes and her father's sense of humor. However, Alejandra was not discouraged. In her opinion, 2 children were no reason to give up on herself. She still dreamed of meeting her other half, a man who could also be a good father to her daughters. Sometime after the couple separated, the ex-husband, whose name is not disclosed, came home to Alejandra. It was a normal practice for the couple. The man would come on weekends to give time to his little girls and help his ex-wife with household chores if needed. However, the ex-husband had no idea that this visit would turn out to be his last. Alejandra asked him to enter the house through the backyard, reasoning that the lock on the front door was jammed. The man made his way into the house. Alejandra said that her youngest daughter was bathing right now and asked him to come into her bathroom. Suspecting nothing, the man went in there. There was a ringing silence in the house. There were no sounds, the usual cartoons, the laughter of children. The man went into the bathroom. There was tape on the floor, and there was no daughter in the filled bathtub. He began to realize that something was going wrong. Right at that second, his ex-wife stood behind him with a hammer and delivered a blow with all her might to his head. Then another one. The man fell. Blood was pouring out of the gaping hole in his skull. Everything around him was covered in blood. As the experts later found out, the man had no chance to save himself. Death occurred almost instantly after the first blow with a heavy blunt object. The eldest daughter, who unexpectedly returned early from a friend, became an unwitting witness to this truly horrifying picture. The children often observed their parents' quarrels. Alejandra was determined to be mentally disturbed. She often took it out on her friends. Friends even noticed how the young woman could hit her husband. They often noticed scratches on his arms and neck. As for the housemates, they constantly observed her tantrums in an even pace and inadequate behavior. But this time, the situation got out of control. The daughter ran out of the house and began to call for help. Almost immediately, a neighbor came running, who then called the police squad. The psychologist was arrested and charged with murder. At the station, the young woman was placed in a cell, where she had to stay for a month until her first hearing. At the trial, Alejandra denied her guilt. Lawyers put forward a version of self-defense. According to them, the ex-husband was intensely jealous of Alejandra and made up that she was bringing men into the house, which could negatively affect the psyche of little girls. On the day of the crime, he showed up unplanned at his ex-wife's house, went through the back door, hoping to catch his wife with another man. Then he pounced on Alejandra, who was in the bathroom at the time, trying to put together a nightstand. She then had to exert self-defense, in which she delivered 2 blows to the back of her ex-husband's head. On June 14, 2012, the sentence was handed down. Taking into account the evidence provided by the defense and the presence of 2 minor children, Alejandra was sentenced to 1 year and 4 months. Thanks to the coordinated work of lawyers and the money of his father, the term behind bars was replaced by a suspended sentence. A couple of months later, the appeal was filed again with a request to drop the charges. The argument was assault in self-defense. Human rights activists asked for a jury trial. They felt unbearably sorry for the poor woman who was presented at trial as a victim of domestic violence. As a result, the court reviewed the case and handed down an acquittal. After her release, the young woman proceeded to provide her psychological counseling as before. She created an image of a victim of gender inequality who fought for her rights like most women in North America and finally won. This created image made Alejandra even more popular to potential clients. Soon, Maria Alejandra met Alan Carrera Cuella, a large Mexican businessman, the son of Adrian Carrera Francis. He was a tall, handsome, and statuesque man. His father had previously been head of special services for the Central District and had achieved considerable success in his career. Soon, Alan expanded his business and created a whole chain of construction stores that began to open all over the country. Part of Alan's business was legalized, but the other part, which few people knew about, was closely connected with crime. By the way, it was for this reason that his father was removed from his position when one of his son's financial frauds was uncovered. In addition, Alan had a stake in a criminal group that was engaged in the transportation of psychotropic substances to the United States. Their base was located in a border town and was guarded by purchased police officers. This group controlled a small portion of the trafficking of psychoactive substances in the South. Alan's father was proven to be involved in his son's affairs. The police managed to get a statement out of him, so he was facing a 20-year prison sentence. But on July 18, 2000, Adrian Carrera was released early thanks to the Witness Protection Program. Immediately after his release, he devoted all his time to his son and his legitimate business. The son grew up quickly, adopting his father's views and experiences. After graduating from college, Alan Carrera decided to follow in his father's footsteps and became an entrepreneur. He was very interested in the store of household appliances, which despite his young years, he completely led himself. This business was not as large as his father's, but it brought good money. There were always a lot of women around him, but Alan from childhood was in love with a classmate whom he took as his wife, smart, beautiful, from a good family. The marriage was short, but bright. Daddy had a beautiful daughter. However, a lot of work and almost total absence of Alan at home led this marriage to divorce. Alan was extremely hard to part with the woman he loved since high school. New novels did not bring pleasure, and loneliness and sadness led to the fact that the man began to drink. Gradually, this grew into a pernicious habit. In an attempt to cope with prolonged depression and love for alcohol, Alan tried many ways: books, AA circles, drips, until one day, fate did not lead the man to a consultation with the famous psychiatrist Alberto, the father of Maria Alejandra. Alan's now ex-wife was also going through a difficult divorce. Alan was the only man in the young woman's life, and despite the separation, she could not allow anyone else to her. To somehow get rid of her loneliness, Alan's ex-wife also decided to visit a therapist. The psychiatrist, with whom Alan was rehabilitated, explained that he could not lead both spouses for ethical reasons, and therefore recommended the woman to turn to Alejandra. However, it is worth noting that he did not inform the clients that Alejandra was his daughter. Alejandra quickly realized that her patient's ex-husband could be a great match. He was said to be a pleasant man in the prime of life and quite wealthy. Not thinking long, Alejandra asked her client to bring her ex-husband for another consultation. According to the therapist, she would be able to solve their problem in one session and break the strong bond between the former spouses. From the very first minutes of the steamy session, Alejandra began to put her plan to seduce the entrepreneur into action. The result did not wait long. Immediately after the session, Alan offered the therapist a cup of coffee to discuss family problems. For propriety, the young woman at first even refused to go on a date, because it was contrary to medical ethics. But the date took place the same evening. Between them quite quickly spun an affair. Soon Alan's ex-wife found out about it. She was shocked. She even wanted to report the incident to the doctor's ethics committee. But she didn't. Alejandra was a very competent specialist and therefore was able to convince her client to let the situation go. After all, it says jealousy and unwillingness to let go of the former spouse. And so, according to the doctor, a happy future will not work. In the commission, Alan's ex-wife decided not to apply, but also with the sessions were over. Meanwhile, the relationship with the newly married couple developed quite rapidly. A few months after the first date, the young people decided to live together. After 2 more months, they decided to legalize their relationship. But Alan did not even suspect what skeletons in his closet hides his fiancée and what were the reasons for divorcing her ex-husband. In April 2014, Alan decided to visit his parents and flew to them for the weekend. It became a great occasion to talk about his beloved and the imminent wedding. Alan's parents were extremely surprised that they would find out such important things so late. They had never heard of Alejandra in their son's life before, which was very strange. A week after the meeting with the parents, the marriage was registered. Interestingly, Alejandra asked her husband not to call her friends and relatives. Invitations were not sent, The wedding was supposed to be modest, and the budget did not allow inviting everyone one would have liked. However, as it later turned out, the bride's father did attend the marriage ceremony. At first, the life of the young family seemed like a fairy tale. Young, happy, with a huge number of plans and desires. But it did not last long. Alejandra could not hide her hysterical character. Approach the horrifying denouement of this story, but no one suspects it yet. The relationship between the newlyweds began to change dramatically. Alan was a rather secretive person, and with friends, details of personal life did not share. Therefore, about what was happening behind the closed doors of the couple, little was known. However, it was obvious that the former relationship gave a crack, and the couple no longer seemed so happy. After meeting Alejandra, Alan distanced himself from his family. The last straw was the wedding, to which parents were not invited. After that, they even stopped calling each other. Alan's remaining buddies began to notice that his spouse became more nervous, sometimes behaving inadequately and quickly losing her temper. After a couple of such incidents, Alan was very ashamed and decided to minimize joint meetings. Quarrels in the family occurred on a daily basis and almost always unfounded. One evening, Alejandra, by her own testimony, decided to get into her husband's cell phone. As is usually the case, correspondence with some women was discovered with quite racy content. Of course, it was impossible to turn a blind eye to such things. According to Alejandra, this was the last straw. She reported in court that her husband beat her, insulted and humiliated her in every possible way. When cheating was also discovered, it was pointless to save this marriage. For unknown reasons, Alejandra did not apply traditional methods of psychotherapy and try to save the relationship. Having thought of her husband's cheating, the young woman decided to deal with Alan with a method already known to her. As soon as she made this decision, all her attention could be focused on creating the perfect murder plan. Meanwhile, Alan continued his usual and measured rhythm of life. He didn't even realize what was in store for him. Alan still rarely communicated with his family, but he could not miss the traditional feast, which the family held annually in honor of his beloved grandfather's birthday. Alan, of course, came to the feast, but his parents made it clear that his wife, not the most welcome guest in their house. This situation pissed Alejandra off and further aggravated the relationship in the couple. Was it possible to imagine that this would be the last time the family saw Alan alive? On October 31st, 2014, Alan's phone was last used to send a text message to his family that he had reached home safely after his birthday party. He has not been in touch since then. He hadn't been seen at work for a few days either, which was quite strange because it had never happened before. The entrepreneur was extremely responsible for his work, and soon the launch of a new store was expected and the presence of the head was simply necessary. The reason for this was a terrifying plan of the spouse, which she put into action. After Alan returned from the holiday, there was another scandal, after which Alejandra decided to immediately dispose of her husband. She added a powerful sleeping pill to the milk he traditionally drank before going to bed. Then she smothered him with a pillow. She enjoyed watching her husband slowly lose consciousness in pathetic attempt to remove the pillow and take a breath. Then came the hardest part, getting rid of the body. It was a moment she hadn't had time to plan for. Alan was too heavy, so she had to make do with what she had. Time was short, so Alejandra ran to the neighbor's vegetable garden to get an electric saw. With a grim smile on her face, she sawed her husband's body into pieces. Only a true sadist could do such a thing. Then she packed the body parts into garbage bags and had the foresight to cut off fingers and pull teeth. It was these that would help the investigation in identifying the person, in case the body was found. Alejandra stuffed all the bags into suitcases so that she could remove the corpse from the house without suspicion, but she did not succeed. As dawn approached, Alejandra was unable to leave the house with the suitcase unnoticed. An elderly neighbor, who suffered from insomnia, watched her from her window. She was a little alarmed by the young woman's early departure. Besides, for some reason, her husband did not help to lift the heavier suitcases, and Alejandra was behaving very strangely. She was always looking around. At dawn, Alejandra returned home. This surprised the vigilant neighbor even more. As it would later turn out, She had scattered bags of her ex-husband's remains in different neighborhoods to cover her tracks. As the new day dawned, she went on with her normal life. On November 6, 2014, Mexican police officers discovered the first horrifying find: a human torso with no teeth and no fingers on the hand. The entire police force was put on alert as the incident was egregious in its level of brutality. Less than a day later, other body parts were found in various parts of the city. It is also interesting that the distance between the places where the packages were found was quite significant. Later, this is what would be attributed to Alejandra's long absence from home. All the body parts were sent to the best forensic laboratory, where experts quickly established the fact that all the parts belonged to the same person. In order to avert suspicion from herself, the perpetrator started writing messages to Alan's relatives. She wanted to avert suspicion, but she only made things worse. She didn't even know that her husband had recently distanced himself from the family and had no contact with his relatives. Alejandra informed Alan's parents on his behalf that they were going on vacation and would be out of touch. The whole plan was ruined by Alejandra's father. Alberto began making phone calls to Alan's father's house. He wanted to clarify if his son-in-law's family knew Alejandra's location. Alberto hadn't heard from her in a while, and the patients are very worried about not being able to attend counseling sessions. Later, he calls Alan's relatives again to inform them that his daughter has been found and that she had to be forcibly admitted to the clinic because she is suffering from depression due to her husband's cheating. This greatly frightened the relatives, and they tried to find Alan. But all was unsuccessful, and then the family of the businessman turned to the police. The laboratory experts decided to compare the remains of the recently found with Alan's characteristics. The similarity was 100%, and his relatives also identified him. It was especially hard for Alan's grandfather. Soon after the identification, he became ill with heart disease because it was his only grandson. The investigation issued a search warrant for Alan's home and office. A hillock of fresh earth was found in the backyard of the house. After digging, the man's fingers and teeth were discovered. The find further shocked the capital city. Alejandra was immediately apprehended. Traces of blood were also found in one of the rooms, as well as on the trunk of the car and in the garage. At first, Alejandra tried to deny her guilt. She hoped that she would be able to get away with it with impunity, as she had with her previous husband. But the investigation quickly sorted out the case. The testimony of an elderly witness helped. The time she gave coincided with Alan's estimated time of death. Alejandra used her position to obtain a powerful sleeping pill, the kind of drug only a doctor could get his hands on. This further aggravated the case. The evidence obtained helped establish a link between Alejandra and the brutal massacre of her husband. CCTV cameras also helped trace that the man had gone into the house and never came out of the house again. The fact that the suitcases were taken out was also confirmed by CCTV footage. On December 10, 2014, the jury reached a verdict. Alejandra was sentenced to life imprisonment, murder with brutality, an attempt to conceal this fact, the use of official position. All this was not in favor of the former psychotherapist. Her father, who through the use of connections and bribes tried to spare his daughter from imprisonment, could not help either. But all he managed to do was to keep the trial closed to the public and the press, in order to avoid more publicity. However, he did it all for the sake of his own career. Now hardly anyone else will turn to a specialist who raised such a ruthless monster and could not diagnose problems in time with his own daughter. The case of the death of Alejandra's first husband also came to mind at the trial. However, due to the passage of years, the evidence in this case was not found. The version of Alejandra's involvement in what happened was also considered. There were suspicions that he was in collusion with his daughter, and they committed crimes on the basis of scientific interest. However, this idea found no evidence. After several appeals from the victims, the sentence was commuted to death. This is an unprecedented situation. Such sentences are extremely rare in Mexico, especially in these times. The defendant is also not entitled to a review of the case. The house and all the property of the accused must go to the family of the victim, although who can be comforted by this if the person can no longer be brought back? Apparently, Alejandra was a pragmatic and cruel woman. She had major mental health issues, although medical examinations denied that she had any. She also harbored the influence of her father and used her official position to carry out her manic plans. Impunity after her first crime had unleashed her. Alejandra felt invulnerable and continued to do evil. Perhaps Alan would still be alive if this horrible woman had not been acquitted the first time, but it was too late to talk about it now. Story 6. This high-profile story took place in January 2023 in the state of Pennsylvania, Limerick Township. The township, named after the first settler William Evans, is one of thousands of small and cozy towns scattered across the country. Here a measured and quiet life flows, and it seems that nothing can disturb this harmony. In such places, the inhabitants know each other by sight, and their friendship makes many of them one family. Jennifer and Blair's friendship began while they were working together. They were once business partners, collaborating on common projects. However, even after Blair decided to become a simple chef, their bond did not lose its strength. Their friendship grew beyond business and became more than just a working relationship. Their friendship took on a special significance because of Jennifer's 8-year-old son Noah, who has autism. Blair had always given his friend genuine support and helped her in caring for Noah. Their children were also friends. They often spent time together, and when the children's games would run late, Noah would stay overnight at the Watts house. Jennifer Brown, born in 1979, was an active and full-of-life woman. She was always smiling and exuded an energy that infected everyone around her. Friends and relatives often wondered how she managed to combine so many things and be active, but her true calling was motherhood. About the father of her son Noah, nothing was known. But this situation did not overshadow their lives, but on the contrary, made Jennifer stronger, especially after Noah was diagnosed in early childhood with autism. Taking care of her young son, Jennifer became a reliable support and best friend for him. Mom and son were inseparable friends, spending a lot of time together, sharing moments of joy and supporting each other in times of need. This friendship between them evoked feelings of tenderness and admiration from all who knew their family. The people of the small town saw their closeness and adored this family for their cheerfulness and genuine kindness. Unfortunately, none of them could have anticipated what would happen to Jennifer one winter day. On January 3, 2023, she disappeared without a trace. On the morning of January 4, 2023, the local Limerick Township Police Department received a disturbing call from Antonio Blair Watts Richardson. He was deeply concerned about the disappearance of his close friend. Even though it had been less than 24 hours since he had last seen her or heard her voice, the anxiety inside him was growing by the minute. For hours now, Tony had tried unsuccessfully to contact Jennifer, but all his attempts had gone unanswered. This behavior was completely unlike her. She was active and responsible, always answering calls or messages, especially in matters concerning her son Noah. However, on this day, for some reason, the boy's mom did not meet him after school. The missing person's family and friends were well aware of what a devoted mother and caring woman she was. Therefore, the sudden disappearance caused serious alarm to all who knew her and left no one indifferent. Antonio's call to the police was the first step in a long and mysterious investigation that would soon engulf the entire city and shake it with its tragedy. Immediately after Blair reported his girlfriend missing, a massive search began. Police officers, family, and friends joined forces, hoping to find any trace that might shed light on Jennifer's disappearance. It left many questions in the air, and the main one was, what could have caused the caring mom to leave her son without any explanation? At 4 o'clock that afternoon, Officer Stephen Crawford of the Limerick Township Police Department went to the Brown family home to check on what was going on in the family home. He found that her vehicle was parked by the porch, and upon entering the home, he discovered that her keys, purse, tablet, and work cell phone were still in the house. However, the officer was unable to locate Jennifer's personal cell phone. Later, when police tried to track it down, it was discovered that the phone had been turned off at 7 a.m. on January 4th and could not be traced since then. The last location the signal came from was near Lewis Road and Ridge Pike in the town of Limerick. This was the first serious trace in the investigation and a sign that something terrible had happened to Jennifer. She was reported missing and police began investigating the case. Investigators began questioning her family, friends, and neighbors, hoping to find out if anyone had seen or heard anything at the time Jennifer disappeared. None of the young woman's loved ones or acquaintances, however, could provide any useful information. Her aunt, Diane Brem, and Jennifer's friends, Tiffany Barron and Blair Watts, claimed that there was no way the young mother would have left alone, as she could not leave her son alone. This was a woman full of devotion and love for her child. All efforts made by the authorities and volunteers were fruitless. They could not find any traces or clues as to where Jennifer might have been. Her loved ones appealed to the public through the media for any information on the possible whereabouts of the young woman. A reward was set up, but that too was inconclusive. The case of Jennifer Brown's mysterious disappearance was just beginning to develop, leaving investigators and family with questions and anxious expectations. The police investigation began with a close look at all the circumstances of that day, and her close friend Blair Watts, who was the last person to see Jennifer alive that day, came to the forefront. It was an ordinary January day. Jennifer and Blair sat in the cozy living room discussing life, future plans, and their children. Their children often played together, and Jennifer had asked her friend for help to pick up her son Noah from school so they could spend the evening together. This was a common practice for friends. Blair, being the loyal friend that he was, agreed, and after finishing their conversation, immediately headed to the school to pick up Noah. The next day, however, something strange happened. At school, Noah behaved unusually and caused his teachers concern. They noticed that the boy had missed 2 doses of his medication that helped him manage his condition due to his illness. This was highly unusual, as Jennifer had always been a devoted mother, never neglecting her son's caregiving responsibilities and always being in touch with teachers if anything happened at school. The school staff tried to find out where his mom was and was told by Noah that she had gone to the grocery store and had not returned. This caused even more concern, as this behavior of a sensitive woman was very uncharacteristic. She never left her son alone. At this time, Jennifer's friend, Blair Watts, also tried unsuccessfully to contact her. After not hearing back or contacting Jennifer, Blair decided to see if she would show up to pick up her son from the bus stop. However, when the woman never showed up and concern grew by the minute, Blair had no choice but to go to the police and report his friend missing. As time passed, no new information about the possible whereabouts of the missing woman had emerged since the investigation began. Hopes for her return were fading with each passing day. It seemed that Jennifer had disappeared without a trace and might never be found. But on January 18th, 2 weeks after her disappearance was reported, 2 employees working in a warehouse near Roseford, in the neighboring municipality of Limerick Township, discovered something strange. They came out of the building to get coffee and saw what appeared to be a freshly dug hole in front of them. When they went closer to inspect it, they were horrified to find the body of a woman buried in a shallow grave. The workers immediately notified the police, who immediately arrived at the burial site. Upon examining the body, police identified the young woman they had been searching for the past 2 weeks as Jennifer Brown. The sheriff called her family and informed them that the missing woman's body had been found partially buried near a warehouse in Roseford. An autopsy revealed that Jennifer's death was clearly violent. Death was due to asphyxiation, and she had 3 broken ribs. This indicated that Jennifer had probably struggled with her killer, who had beaten her to subdue her. Now, the nature of the investigation changed. The missing person case was reclassified as a murder case. Police once again began interviewing everyone who was close to the murdered woman, including her family and friends. However, these interviews yielded no new information about the case, and the police had no suspects. It seemed as if the investigation was about to wind down, and the police had no one to follow up on. But later, when detectives least expected it, they got a lead from an unexpected source. After the news of Jennifer's disappearance and murder was published, the police called for anyone who had any information that could help unravel this mysterious story to come forward to investigators. Noah's teacher came to that call. She recalled a case that at first glance seemed unimportant to her, but after Jennifer's death was recognized, raised serious suspicions. The teacher said that Noah shared with her an important detail about that terrible day, January 4th, when Jennifer disappeared. Little Noah told her that when Blair Watts picked him up from the bus stop on January 3rd, the boy noticed that among Blair's belongings was his mom's personal cell phone. Noah recognized it immediately, as the lock screen displayed his own childhood photo. That moment turned out to be key in the investigation into the young woman's murder. Previously, investigators had already assumed that Jennifer's killer carried away her cell phone. Now Blair Watts came into the spotlight, becoming the main suspect. The police began to scrutinize the relationship between Jennifer and Blair, and mysterious details began to come out, shocking even experienced investigators. Jennifer and Tony's friendship seemed solid and long-standing. They spent a lot of time together, knew each other well, and their families interacted with each other. But once the business side of their relationship came to light, it turned out there was a dark history lurking beneath the mask of friendship. Blair Watts was the owner of a restaurant called Birdie's Kitchen, which unfortunately fell into disrepair and closed in early 2022. After this, Blair turned to his friend, asking her for help. In August 2022, Jennifer decided to invest in her friend's business to help him revive Birdie's Kitchen in a new location. They entered into a contract that stipulated that Jennifer would provide regular financial contributions to keep the restaurant going every 6 weeks or so, in order to rebuild Birdie's Kitchen and get it back on the market. According to Blair, from August through January, Jennifer turned over approximately $36,000 to him to rebuild the business. They also agreed that she would hand him another $9,000, according to their agreement. Blair found a new location for the restaurant and was to deposit some of the money as rent, enter into a contract, and reopen Birdie's Kitchen in January 2023. However, it turned out that the money provided for the investment was spent on Blair's personal needs. The property owners with whom he had entered into the agreement drew attention to his failure to fulfill his financial obligations. Therefore, on December 26, 2022, they terminated the agreement with him. Blair found himself in a desperate situation. He lost not only his money, but also the opportunity to open his restaurant. The police began to suspect that in desperation he had decided to commit a terrible crime to save his business. Looking closely at the financial transaction history on Jennifer's iPad, investigators discovered 2 unauthorized transfers of $17,000 to Birdie's Kitchen on January 3rd. The funds were not included in the formal agreement between Brown and Blair. In addition, the transfers failed several times and were only successful after the 2-factor authentication system on the iPad was disabled, which increasingly pointed to Jennifer's friend's involvement in her murder. Police then interviewed the owners of the property, who had terminated their lease with Blair. It turned out that on January 4th, the very day Blair reported Jennifer missing, he appeared before them, saying he had the funds to enter into a lease agreement. Investigators were convinced that Blair was the killer. However, realizing that he would never admit his guilt, they needed to gather irrefutable evidence. Their first step was to interview Blair's wife, Tiara Taylor, and find out where Blair was the day Jennifer disappeared. Tiara told detectives that on January 3rd, Blair visited the Brown family around 1 p.m. and did not return home until 4:30 a.m., when he picked up Noah from the bus stop. Tiara also claimed that her husband came home only briefly and then left again around 5 p.m. and did not return until late that night. This time frame became a key point. Further investigation revealed that Blair had spent the night with Tatiana Garrett, his mistress, and did not meet up with her until around 8 p.m. This meant that between 5 and 8 p.m., Blair had no alibi. Based on the available evidence, detectives put together an alleged chronology of the murder. According to their version, on January 3rd, Blair went to Jennifer's house while Noah was at school at about 1 p.m. and allegedly killed her. He then made 2 transfers of funds from the murdered woman's iPad to his account and left to pick up Noah from the bus stop around 4 p.m. Later, he returned to Jennifer's house, dropped Noah off, and traveled back to the crime scene to dispose of the body. He took the body to a field near Roseford and buried it in a shallow grave. From there, the killer made his way to Tatiana's house, where he spent the rest of the night. Everything was carefully planned, and it would seem that the murderer might have gone unnoticed had it not been for one mistake he made, and it proved fatal. That mistake was letting Noah see his mother's cell phone. That was the key moment that led the police directly to Blair. Law enforcement now had enough evidence to convict Blair, but they decided to investigate further to see if he was guilty. It took the involvement of film experts and a specially trained dog capable of detecting cadaveric odors indoors. First, the dog was brought to Jennifer's home so that it could memorize the woman's scent. There, in her own kitchen, the terrible crime had taken place. The police then directed the dog to Blair's car, and it instantly detected the same depressing odor. It was the last piece of evidence needed to bolster detectives' confidence in Blair's involvement in the murder. On February 8th, after months of investigation, Blair was arrested and charged with first-degree murder, third-degree murder, and theft. He is currently incarcerated at the Montgomery County Correctional Facility with no bail application and awaiting a preliminary hearing where he will have to answer for his horrific acts before the law. Jennifer's friends and family were on the brink of despair when they discovered her dead, but their hearts are still pierced by the pain and shock that the killer was someone they knew and trusted, someone who should have been a close friend to Jennifer and her son. But now that the killer has been identified and brought to justice, they can finally feel that justice has been served. Tiffany Barron, a friend of Jennifer's who spoke on behalf of the family, expressed her feelings during the interview. "I still dream about Jennifer. Noah keeps asking about my mom, and I don't know what to say." At the conclusion of the investigation and trial, if Blair is found guilty, he will spend the rest of his life in custody. The case was solved thanks to the attentiveness of Jennifer's 8-year-old son. The boy noticed a mistake made by the killer. This helped to discover the truth and punish the criminal. The tragedy in Limerick Township serves as another reminder that even the most carefully planned crimes will sooner or later be solved. Meanness and inhumanity will not go unpunished, and the perpetrators will sooner or later be brought to justice before the law. As the rain falls and the night deepens, thank you for being here with me at Radio Night Crime. True crime stories remind us of life's mysteries and the need to stay aware, even in the stillness of the night. If you enjoyed tonight's story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Let the sound of the rain lull you to sleep, and until next time, stay safe, stay curious, and let the night keep you company.